Welcome back, everybody. This is week 4 of nuk218, Introduction to 3D Animation and Modeling for New Compositors. We have a lot to get through today. We have to model an entire head inside a Modo, and then we have to take that in a nuke and use it to relight the talking head. So a lot to get through, and just hang in there. I'm going to try and keep the runtime as tight as possible. So first of all, we need 2 reference images to model our head. And I actually have an additional video that's available for download this week, or it may be included in your media, I'm not sure which, that takes you through the process of actually building a simple rig to align 2 images to the appropriate locations inside a nuke. You can go ahead and load that up if you like, or you can just work with the final provided images. These are the images that we create during that process, but we're going to go to the Images tab inside of Modo, and at the top there's Add Clip. You can either choose an image or an image sequence. We want to load an image. And in the nuk218 class04 images folder are the 2 images we want that we rendered out of nuke. So in they come. And now let's go ahead and go to the items menu. And what we want to do is add 2 backdrop items. So you select that from the list. Add one. We'll call this in_front. Backdrop, and we'll add another backdrop item and call that backdrop. Okay, so we got our front and back images ready to go. We haven't actually added them yet. We've just named these backdrop items. So now what we want to do is actually load them up. I'm going to switch over to the Model Quad tab for a moment so you can see how this works. You can see that we actually have an image here. It's blank. Now, right now, in my properties, it just says Add User Channel. That's because I have the wrong sub-tab selected. So whenever you see you're missing information you expect to see in properties in Modo, it's probably because you have one of these tabs selected instead of the one you want. By the way, we have properties, channels. I think I briefly went over this last week. Display and lists. Properties is the most common place you want to be. And then lists is another common place where you can find UV maps and the like, and we'll be doing that a little bit later in the class, unwrapping our head. But just so you know, properties and lists are the most common. So if you get confused, you're going, wow, where are my properties? You're probably in a list, or you're in properties, but you have the wrong tab selected. So in backdrop, let's go ahead. About halfway down, there's an add clip, and this is the backdrop. I named that incorrectly. We'll fix that. Brain's not working right. That should be side. In fact, it's the left side, left backdrop. We'll call it that. And so in that backdrop, we actually want the side. There we go. Now, right now, it's showing up in the front view. And that's because in the backdrop properties, you can actually choose the projection type. We'll change that to left. And now it's showing up in the left view. And we want to do the same for the front. So we'll go to the front backdrop, go to the image selector and choose front. There it is. And because we perfectly aligned these in nuke, they're perfectly aligned here. If they weren't, we could actually adjust the position and the scale in the transform section at the backdrop node. You'll see I can actually shift these just by dragging the values there. I don't want to do that, so I'll set it back. But we could make those adjustments to scale and position and even rotation if necessary. Okay, so we now have our 2 backdrops. This one is appearing in the front, this one's appearing the side. Now, we have our traditional quad view here where we have a top, front, and in this case a left view, and then our perspective view. Scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out, Alt or Option key to rotate. Option Shift will pan the view. All right. However, we're going to do something new. We are going to use the model view, which allows you to work with a single larger space. The main reason I'm doing this, to be honest, is because I'm stuck with a fairly tiny monitor for these demos. But this isn't quite as limiting as you may think, because if you hold down Control and then press space, you get this pie menu, and you can quickly select your preferred view. So we can go top, which obviously has nothing right now, front, left, or jump to perspective. And you'll see in perspective that we have this nice interface where we can see the side view and we can also see the front view, and that's going to really help us model things quickly. One other thing I want to look at for a moment is the viewing options. So right now we're looking at an advanced OpenGL. We haven't actually got anything in there yet. But if you click on this middle item here at the top left, you can actually choose visibility options and viewport options and shade options. So I've got overlay items turned on right now. If I turn that off, everything becomes solid. You'll see why I may want to switch back and forth between those in a moment. The other one, so we did Control spacebar brings up the pie menu. Alt or Option spacebar gives you access to the most common items for selection, transform, changing your action center, fall off, and symmetry. We talked briefly about some of those last week. Others we may not cover in this course. After all, this is not the Modo 101 course. This is enough Modo to get you by. Let's start modeling. So we're going to use a subdivision surface modeling system in here, and I'll go ahead, Control spacebar, choose my front view, and I'm just going to start with a basic square cube. Roll that out like so, and just to get things working easily to start off with, I'm going to go back in the properties for the cube creation. Whenever you create something, the creation properties appear in the lower left here, and I will change the X position to 0 just to make sure I'm perfectly centered on my X-axis, even though the photo is a little skewed. His head is tilted very slightly to his left screen right, and so this isn't going to be perfectly symmetrical, but it'll do for the start. And now I'll Control space back to perspective, and I can now pull out these little blue handles to align this to the basic shape of the head. All right. The one other thing we do want to do is decide how many segments we have. And right now I have probably too many segments. So let me turn those down. Maybe I will do definitely one in Y. We'll do 2 segments in X and 2 segments in Z. And this will make sense in a moment. If I temporarily turn off the visibility for the backdrops, you'll see there are my segments. I got 2 in X, 2 in Z, just 1 in Y. So these basically create polygons. If I go ahead and click on the polygon selector here, I can select individual polygons like so. All right, click in the gray space and hit the tab key. That will turn this to a subdivision surface. Nothing much to look at yet, so let's go ahead and keep building. So what we do to build this up is use the bevel tool. I'm going to select those top 4 polys. If you accidentally select an additional poly, you can just Control click to deselect it, and you Shift click to add to a selection. All right, with those selected, we're going to bevel. That's the way you simply add to the geometry of a subdivision surface. So I'll just press the B key, click, and that will create a new layer, and I'm just going to pull that up, and I'm not going to worry about how it fits with the contours of the face just yet. Now, if you want to add another after this, instead of having to drop the bevel tool, I'll show you how to do that. If we hit the space bar, that will drop the tool, and then I can press B again and click to make it active, and it makes the bevel tool active again. I can create another lift. But instead of having to do that 2-step process, if you just Shift click on that surface again, it does the same thing. It drops the tool and then reactivates it with another bevel so we can come up even further. And that'll do for now. You can see this looks really weird, but hang in there because it won't for long. And now I'm going to hit the space bar to deselect the bevel tool, click in the gray space to deselect those polys I had at the top, and I'll just go and select these ones at the bottom. Those 4 at the bottom. We'll do the same thing just coming down. So I press B, click, and pull down. And I will just tuck these in a little bit as I go. And that's fine. And I will go Shift click to add another bevel, pull it down with the blue handle, and this is going to be the chin. And I will Shift click and pull down. That can be neck, and I'll Shift click, pull down, And I'll shrink that in a bit to make it really obvious. All right. Hit the spacebar, click to deselect, and you have a perfect model of Ian's head. Obviously, we have a little bit more work to do, but this is the beginning. In fact, we should save. Let's go ahead and save up. So I will go to where I have files here, class 4, Modo, and we'll call this Ian version 001. Actually, the way Modo does versioning, I think I need to have 4-digit pads without the V. Because now if I go to File, Save Incremental, it will now increment that. If I had the V at the front, or if I didn't have, I think if I didn't have enough pads, it would actually add a version number on top of my version number. Now that we have the basic shape of the model lined up, it's time to actually refine these curves. Now, we've seen a little bit of this last week, but basically we can select vertices in vertice mode, edges in edge mode, or polys in poly mode. We'll be switching back and forth all the way through. Always click in the gray space to deselect. The selection from any mode that you've had active previously will still be there when you go back to it. And spacebar will quickly switch between those three modes. If you happen to be in items mode, which is the way you move entire meshes around, you won't be able to spacebar back to the other views. So you'll need to first click into one of these three, and then spacebar will work to shift you between them. So let's get started, and I want to show you how you work with edges. So if we select this ring here, I've only selected one section of the ring so far, but if I double click it, it'll actually select the entire ring all the way around. And now what I can do, I'm going to leave symmetry turned off, because what we're doing is fairly simple. I'm not going to bother with symmetry being turned on. A lot of times character modelers will actually leave symmetry turned on to X, so whatever they do on the left side will be done to the right, and they really only have to do half the work. Because of what we're doing and keeping it simple, it actually makes it easier to leave symmetry off. So we'll do that. And now WERT moves us between our different move tools. So first of all, we can go to R and scale in like this. I can also hit the W key and move this if I need to left or right, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, once you've got one of these rings selected, the left and right arrows will actually quickly shift you through the different rings in your object. So you can actually move around, make changes to different ones, and then move on to another one. So the only problem right now is that we can't really see our head through the model. And the way we can fix that is to go to the viewport options and change the shade options to overlay items. I do want to show you a quick shortcut than having to pop up to that menu all the time. If you hit the O key, that's going to bring up this little control menu, and in there you can see you have access to all the same tools, and we will turn on overlay drawing and click away, and now you'll see that we can see our mesh faintly through everything else that's going on, and that's going to help us to quickly line everything up. Now I've picked up a tool there. I'm going to click to drop it, and if I go up to the top, you see it actually only selects that one edge at the top. So what I'm going to do is actually, in this case, I'm going to have to shift click to add points. Now if you hit the up arrow after you've selected some points, it will try to find the next logical selection, and so I can have it actually, by hitting the up arrow, select around for me. And now I'm going to go ahead and hit the R tool to scale. I'm going to scale this in. W key for the move tool, bring it back down a little bit. R key again just to scale it to line up. W and just move it a little bit. I can also grab this tool to move uniformly in all directions at the same time. This is going to be very familiar to us poor rotoscoping monkeys because we're used to roto, and this is a very similar process in a lot of ways. We're just changing scale and moving around. This is more like a B-spline adjustment than a Bezier, but same kind of idea. And now we've done that. I use my right arrow to jump down. This one's almost done. Now I haven't been looking in this direction, so you can see we've got kind of the Frankenstein look going on. So I'll pop back up here, R, scale in. And actually, if you undo, you can also get back to previous selections, but I'm going to hit the spacebar to drop tool, click, shift click, try that up arrow, and sure enough, it can select all the way around. Sometimes it will pick a weird path, so don't always assume the up arrow is going to work for you. And now R key will scale that into basically where we would expect the skin, the actual head without hair, to show up, like so. And we're on our way. We'll deal with the nose in a moment, but let's finish out the contour of the head. So, whoops. We'll come down here. That looks okay. We'll actually have to add a little bit more detail later in this area, but for now, let's just scale a little bit. W, push this forward a touch, like so. Go to the next one, push this forward, and actually R, scale down. Now you can change the center of scale by just clicking here. So if I want to scale from the back, which is what I want to do in this case, I can click on the back and then grab the scale tool and it will tuck in that way. And now I'm going to use the left and right keys, W, shift this like so, and I'm going to actually pull this up so it matches the chin. Now you'll see that I have my lower section. I'll see if I can use this a little bit, and we'll pull this up here, scale, I'll scale from the back, scale in, go up a bit, scale from the back, scale out, and I'll actually pull this down a little bit. But right now, once we get past here, this still needs a little bit of scaling. We don't have any more end rings to add to this section down the bottom. So I'm going to hit the space bar, and I want to introduce you to another tool. There's all kinds of weird and wonderful tools down here for deforming, duplicating, mesh edit. It's a little hard to figure out where some of these tools are, so you just need to get used to it. What we're looking for right now is we want to do something to the edge. So I'll go to the edge tool. I want to create a new edge. There's something called the slide tool, which allows you, when it's selected, to move an edge, to slide it up and down. Now you can do that simply by moving, but this does it in a more natural way. You can actually choose a mode for how it moves. And a nice thing is if I check this duplicate, it will actually create a new edge. So I'm going to create one new edge, should do it, just about down here. Spacebar to deselect. Click in the gray space to deselect my geometry. Now I'll go and line these things up again. So R key, click back here. That's good. W key, I'm going to bring this up. Adjust the scale. And as you can see, I now need to make some adjustments to my previous shape to get a more natural curvature. There's nothing wrong with tweaking individual points, which we'll look at in a moment. So I'll pull this down, and I want to tuck this in for the neck. We don't need to be absolutely perfect. We'll do some fine-tuning in the next step, but we are, in theory, on our way. Let's press the O key, bring up the options. We'll turn off overlay drawing, and let's deselect these shapes, and you'll see that underlying, our chin's a little extreme right now, but we have the beginnings of a shape that actually matches the head we're trying to model. So for the sake of keeping this tutorial brief, I'm going to keep this incredibly simple in terms of the basic structure. But there's one additional tool that we haven't looked at yet. Now I've also turned on the Symmetry and X tool to match my movements left and right. When you want to add additional geometry like we do to create a nose right now, just go ahead and click on Slice, and you can create an arbitrary slice wherever you want simply by clicking and dragging. It creates a plane that defines where that new slice is going to be added. And you'll see it gets a new line gets added because we're in symmetry mode to both sides, space bar to deselect, and now we've got some extra edges here. So now I can say, all right, I will add a nose. Select those polygons, press B to bevel. And this may not be the best way to make a nose, but it's going to work for us right now. I'm going to click up the top here and just rotate that out. Whoops. Change my rotation and scale for some reason. Click at the top to set the center of rotation, and bang, we got ourselves a nose. All right. And likewise, for the eye detail, in fact, we probably should have done the eyes first. Let's undo a bit. And let's just go to the front view. One thing we haven't looked at yet is topology viewing mode. If I hit the O key and click topology mode, it gives me a transparency, but only shows me the front faces, which is actually really handy. So now I'll use my slice tool, and I'm going to just slice straight through here. If I hold down the control key before I start dragging, it will constrain it. And that's quite handy. And I will drop the tool, and then Shift C is the hotkey. I'm going to slice again, control key, drag right around where the eyes would be. Drop the tool. Now I'll bevel this area here. Tab key, I'm sorry, the control space. Thought I was in Nuke for a second there. Back to perspective. And let's hit the O key, temporarily disable topology mode. And we'll select those polys, hit the ET to rotate, set the rotation up here, and rotate out like so. And then I should probably move those a little bit. We get ourselves some kind of a nose shape. And for this exercise, we'll keep this really simple and won't spend too much time doing eye detail. In fact, let's just like that. Move it in a little bit. And for the eyes, we'll create one more set of loops. So I'll turn this off for the moment. Go to the slice tool again. Slice down this way. Whoops, I didn't go all the way. Slice tool. Slice right through. There we go. Stand back the front again. And I'll actually just double click and just move those over a little, like so. Now select this poly, bevel it, and stick it in. Create a little bit of eye detail. I'm going to need to clean that up. So far we've just been moving edges, polys, and I don't know if we've moved vertices yet, but we can also do that by in vertice mode, selecting a vertex, pressing W, and moving it around. However, there's a much more powerful tool, and it's called the Element Move tool. T is the hotkey. When you right click, you can choose its area of influence, and when you have the tool active, actually, I don't know if this is a bug or just my ignorance, but I always have to hit the space bar to deselect the tool once I've right clicked to resize it. and then spacebar deselect, then select it by pressing T again. But you'll see I can actually select an edge, a poly, or a point, and I can then just move that element. So I can hit the T key and whoops, make sure nothing is selected before you hit the T key, otherwise you'll get this issue here. Just move this W. Here we go. Click to deselect. Now I hit the T key. And now I can start shaping these points, moving things around. And making basic adjustments to the shape. Now if I hit the tab key right now, you'll see things start to get messed up, and this is part of the problem with trying to be overly simplistic in the way we're building. We're going to cause all kinds of problems, and what I really want to do is just show you how to bang out a model, not how to build a great model. And let me just scale these in. That's really what we're doing. So you will expect the geometry not to be perfect on this model. I really don't want to spend too much more time on it, so let's just dig in. Now that we have this element move tool, I can resize to have a little bit more influence over things, and hit the spacebar to drop it, hit the T key to bring it back. We can just start making adjustments to individual elements to try to make more sense of our object. Like adding a chin, for example. All right. Let's turn this back on. We can start making adjustments, rejiggering everything until things are in position. I got to move all this geometry back, so I'm going to resize my tool to be larger, drop it, hit the T key, and you'll see now I can actually move a bunch of this stuff at once and line it up with where I want it to go. If this, I'm going to shrink to much smaller detail. Come in here. Whoops. I need to actually, my T's gone too small. And we can just keep refining our shape until we get where we want to go. Alright, so I think we'll all agree this is an incredibly rough model. Not really enough geometry there to fill in the details, but for the sake of the tutorial, this is where we'll leave it. I've saved this as EN05 if you want to bring it up. This is not the ideal way to topologize an image. As you can see, if you hit the tab key, it's not horrible, but it's not great. And it's worth going through a head modeling tutorial if you can to go over the details. But what we're focusing on is bashing models out. I do want to mention one other method that's actually really cool in Modo. Let me just turn off the visibility for my object right now, and we'll add another mesh layer here. Actually, I don't even need to do that. I'll undo that. If I go to the Layout tab, you'll see Modo ships with a bunch of different objects, and I can, for example, double-click a man head and just bring that in. And using that element move tool, I could then start, if I was in the right mode, I could start adjusting this thing to fit with the way my custom head needs to be. So you can take existing details and geometry and just massage it into place using whatever size brush is necessary. Get the idea? So that is absolutely another way to make this work. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. We'll just move ahead with our simple model. I'm not sure how great it's going to be for relighting, but just trying to keep this course in scope. It's the best we're going to do. something simple like this. And often for many gags, this is all you need, just a basic representation, and you'll see why once we hit nuke. So a couple of things we need to do. The first one is we need to texture map this. We need a UV map, and so to do that we need to unwrap it. The UV tab is where all this happens, and Modo has a very nice, elegant unwrapping system. First thing we do is in edge mode, we select the seams where we want to unwrap. And I should probably not be in symmetry mode for this. And I'm going to select a few lines, and now if I hit the up arrow, Modo will remember or anticipate where this should go and continue around. And you just have to kind of practice getting used to where the seams should be. Basically, you're trying to figure out how you could break this up into multiple pieces and lay it flat. And so these are sort of pretty decent cut points I have here. And now all I do is, first of all, I'll go to the list section over here, and I'm actually just going to create a new map, call it texture, and I'll click the unwrap tool and just click down. And as soon as I do, it creates a map. And if I drag the iterations, this is how I adjust how this thing's laid out. I want to give more attention to the face, so right about there is probably a good place to create a good map. And you'll see that it shows me where I cut those two seams. By the way, if you see the red, that means you've got overlapping polygons, and they'll be represented by two or more polygons will be represented by the same area of the image map. So you definitely don't want that. You want to break this out until it makes the most sense. Just set 100 iterations, looks good. Let's test this out. So first of all, I'm going to delete the other texture map that was put in there. And we need to give this object a surface. So I'll switch to polygons, make sure everything's deselected. When I press M for material, it will apply it to everything. And in setup before, I already did this once, so I have an EN head here, but you would type in the name of the material you want, click on OK, and it then applies that material. So if we go to the shader tab under render, you'll see there's my EN head material. And I'm going to add an image layer. I'll say new image, and we'll call this new image sample texture map, and I'll click save. And I actually did this before. It asked me what resolution. I say yes, 2048 by 2048. And it creates that. And in the properties section, I want to go to the texture locator, make sure it's selected my texture, which it has, and make sure it is in fact using the image that I selected. And it is. As you can see there in the texture layers, image, sample texture map. That's the one I selected. And you can actually drag and drop this over the UV texture map section. And what we'll do is we'll just do a quick test paint. So I'm going to go ahead and click the model tab here, but I can actually choose what's represented there. So by default, the Modo Tools comes up when you click model, but you can just change that to paint, which I have done. And now I can select a paintbrush and paint on my model. Now, unfortunately, I don't have my Wacom here, but you can see with the mouse that it does indeed select things appropriately. All right, I'll undo that. And we now have everything ready. We've got a texture map. The one thing left to do is to fix this polygon model. Unfortunately, Nuke does not support subdivision surface modeling. So what Nuke's going to see if we try to import this is this. And that's not going to be particularly useful. So here's what we're going to do. I don't want to delete this because this is the simplest way to edit the mesh later if we wanted to come back and say fix the nose up, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to right click and duplicate. And sorry, I duplicated the wrong thing. make sure I have my mesh selected. I'll go to items just to be safe. Right click and duplicate. And right click and duplicate. This will make sense in a moment. And I'll call this en proxy. And I'll call this en full. So I will leave my main, let's version up, file, save incremental. I'll leave my main there if I ever want to go back and edit this subdivision surface, but I'll turn it off for now. And in the proxy, what I'm going to do is I need to bake out the subdivision, but I'm going to set the subdivision level down here in properties to a value of 1. And now I'm going to do what's called freezing the mesh. So in proxy, I'm going to go to geometry freeze, and it will actually convert those polys to a basic underlying structure there. Now the reason I made a proxy was to keep things light when I'm just setting things up in Nuke, and then I can switch out later. So now for the full, we'll select that, and I'll leave the subdivision level set to, actually I'll set it up to 3 if it's not already. And that will increase the subdivision quality. And now I'll freeze that one. Geometry, freeze, default, click OK. So I now have a very detailed mesh here. I have a proxy low resolution mesh here. And I have the original subdivision surface mesh here. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to switch to the front view. And we will turn back on our front backdrop image like so. Hit the O key and turn on topology mode so that we can see through. And what I need to do for Nuke is I need to find points that I can perfectly align with the image in the viewer. And so, for example, here, right on the creases of the eye, I can see the edge detail right where that point hits. So this is going to help me to line things up. I'm going to go and click the model button. It's still on my paint tools in the UV. And I'll choose the brush. And I'm just going to brush on corner of the eye, and you can see an X coming up here. I can't see it here because I have my topology mode turned on. If I turn that off, I can see the X I just created, and I'll turn that back on, but I can see it over here in my other view. So I put an X right through the point that corresponds to corner of the eye. If I had my Wacom, this would be easier, but I'll just write here eye corner like so, and again O key, turn off topology. There, I can actually see that written onto the model, and I'll turn that back. We'll do the other eye corner as well, which is right here. So I'm going to paint straight through that point. And you can see in my UV texture map, it's showing up there as well. Now, another useful point will be just, let's see. Well, this crease would be useful here, but it's kind of falling between the two. Let's do the bridge of the nose. Right there. And I can see that's just shown up. And let's do right on the center of the mouth. So let's see, I need at least 6. I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do right on the tip of the ear, which isn't perfectly lined up in my model, but I'm shifted over a little bit. So do the bottom tip of the ear, which would be right. Let's actually select it. Go to edges. Actually be shape between those two edges there, which I can see here. So I want to do it right there. I'll zoom in a little bit, deselect, grab my brush tool, and stroke right through it. Make sure I selected those. I did. And I'll do that on the other side as well. So, looking for, I would imagine, no, it's going to be the next one down. We can always count these out from centering 1, 2, 3, 4. So right here is actually where we want it. Zoom in. I believe I've got this right. The crosshair goes right there. Looks correct. So got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and to get a sixth, you know, this one's right on the top of the hairline. That's a good one. So I'll stroke through there. And you can see that showing up here and here because my UV seam is there. And we'll do one more right between the eyebrows at level, like so. All right, we're all done. We need to go to the Images tab and just right-click and save what's currently called diffuse color. That's the texture that we've just painted onto. All that's left is to export, so we'll just save this out as an FBX. Let's do save as. Choose the Geo section in our class 4 folder. We can just give it the same name and make sure FBX is selected as the export mode. Yes, we know that it's not perfect, but it's what we want right now. And let's head back to Nuke. Finally, in Nuke, load up class 3 solve version 1. This is the solve from last week. I actually tweaked this a little bit from what we actually tracked in last week's class. And let's read in our Geo. We'll go in here and we'll track it down. It will be in the Geo folder. There it is. In base model 7 FBX is the one I exported. And it comes, and we'll get to choose from the 3 mesh layers, and we want to work with the proxy right now. And we also want the textures, so we'll just read that in, and that's going to be found in the Modo because it will have saved right next to the Modo projects. There it is, diff color. Open that up, and let's get rid of all the excess right now. Let's give it a background of some checkerboards. They're going to be behind. Make sure they're also square 2K. I'll set that up, and we'll just merge them over. There we go. So we can see our markers and checkerboard just for diagnostics, and we'll feed that in to our read Geo. If you look now in the 3D view, sure enough, there's our head model with the markers where we want them to indicate the different things we're going to select. Because the ears were kind of off to the side when we were selecting the model, I'm going to leave those out of the selection criteria. But now we're going to add a projection solver. And what this will attempt to do is we can tell Nuke which points belong to which parts of the scene, and Nuke will attempt to actually create a camera that would match that. So let's line them up, Geo to Geo, source to source, tab back, and here we have our footage. Now the way we do this is in the 3D view, this thing that looks like the Starship Enterprise, change that to vertex selection. That will allow us to pick vertices on our model. And we're going to start with the hairline one at the top, and we'll just drag select through the point right at the crosshair that we selected. Tab back, and we'll go to frame 163 where there's a fairly neutral expression, and we'll pop up here And right on the hairline in the center here, we'll right click, choose add locator. That's our first one. Tab back. Next one will be right between the eyebrows. So we'll select that guy, tab back. Move in here, again, right between the center of the eyebrows was where we selected. Add locator. Tab back in. Come over here. This one here was the corner of the eye. So it's going to be right about here. Add locator. Other corner. Add locator. 2 more to go. 1, 2, 3, 4. We need to do these bottom 2. So we've got the one directly under the nose, which is right here. Add locator. And got this guy right here, which is right in the center of the lips. We'll choose to add locator. And that's it. Now we just click solve camera, cross our fingers, and we finish with a solve error of a reprojection pixel error of 11.3, which, given what we're trying to do here, isn't that horrific actually. And if we now create camera by clicking the button at the bottom of projection solver, it will create a camera. We can test this out by adding a scanline renderer, connecting our object here, and then we'll merge that back over the source plate. Take a look. And there you have it. I will fade it out in the merge, and you'll see that all our points do in fact align correctly, and we have a camera that matches that criteria. All right, so we've done this. Now here's the problem. We have this camera tracker over here that actually tracks the head through. The problem is it's going to create its own camera when we create a scene. And that camera, in theory, could be the same as this one, but they won't necessarily line up. So we're going to have to do a little bit of geometry to snap these two cameras together at frame 163, where we've set up the initial alignment. And let's see how that goes. First of all, you'll see that this camera that was solved by the projection solver has a pretty crazy focal length here of 165.32 whatever. That's a crazy focal length, whereas the camera tracker we solved last week was more like 17 or something. But what we're going to try and do is cheat the situation by copying that. So we'll go to the projection solver output, we'll copy the focal length, and we'll go to our camera tracker and we'll actually tell it that it has to have the same focal length. And now we'll try and get it to solve with that focal length. So all the same values, and we just go to solve camera. Oh, is that what I want? Yes, solve camera. Yes. And let's take a look. It comes out with a solver of 14.3, some pretty big numbers here. Let's bring these down. Bring the max track error down. Now, one thing I didn't mention when we did our first tracks is that it makes sense to actually look and see which features are being removed as you step through here. So I think we can probably get that down to about, oops, 7.3. Let's see if that's too far. That gets our solve error down to 4.9. I'm going to be bold, try and bring the max error down a little. Let's go to 26. Recalculate, see if we've kicked ourselves off or not. Yeah. Alright. I'll have to resolve, and I'll be a little less ambitious. Alright, so I did a little bit of tweaking, ended up with 4.19. I'm going to be happy with that. So now I can create a scene. Bang. Alright, so we now have the camera that we created with the projection solver and a new camera, and I actually don't care about the rest of this, I just care about the camera. This camera is identical to this camera. The only problem is at frame 163 it's not pointing at the geometry in the right place, and so therefore things won't look correct. What I need to do is align these two cameras so that their position is identical, their rotation is identical. So what this camera is seeing at 163, this camera will see, and then from then on, the tracking will correctly move around the geometry. So how do we do this? Well, this camera is taking an expression link from camera tracker, and camera tracker, don't ask me why it's erroring right now. It shouldn't be. Camera tracker has translate and rotate for the scene. This is a global translate and rotate that will move all of the point clouds created and the rest of it. And so if we move this, we will also move camera 2, our animated camera. But there's also an offset in camera 2 from the scene. So we'll need to compensate for both of those. But let's do each in turn. First thing I'm going to do is add a no-op node. There it is. And I'll rename it X because that saves me a lot of typing. And I'm going to right-click, Manage User Knobs. I'm just going to add 2 3D positions, and I'll call this Trans, and I'll add another one called Rot. And these are going to store at frame 163 my current animated camera positions, because those will change as soon as we adjust the scene values. So that just allows me to store them somewhere easy. So now we go to the camera tracker, and in the scene section we need to create expressions. So for the translate, we'll edit expressions, and we're going to take the projection solver camera, which is camera 1, and then we can do dot translate. And there it is. I'm just going to copy and paste that into the other fields. If I leave the X, Y, Z off, it will automatically figure out which one's which for me. And now let's tab over to our 3D view and bring up both of our cameras. And you can see now that they are correctly positionally aligned just about. And so now we need to do the same thing with rotation. So go to the camera tracker, add an expression, and it will be camera 1 dot rotate. I'll copy and paste that. Bang, they're now almost perfectly aligned. They're a little bit off, and that should be because of the slight offset between the original camera, which I've now stored in X, and the scene. So there's my X, is my expressions. I'll bring X up just above them. There we go. So let me re-edit those expressions. I'm just going to subtract away these values. So I'll say minus X dot trans, and I can just copy and paste that into all these fields. So it's just going to subtract that value there for the offset. And we'll do the same for the rotate. Edit expressions, minus X dot rot. And that's just using those rotation values. And now the camera should be perfectly aligned. And we should be able to see that by looking, let's close everything out here. This is my current merge using the current camera that we have aligned. And I'm going to pull this off here and connect it to my scene solve camera. And there's a very subtle shift, which is most likely some rounding errors because those camera values were really precise. That's my guess anyway. And now with any luck, as we step through to other frames, we can find that our geometry is tracking with the shot. And that's actually pretty cool. Now it's bound to drift because of the nature of what we've done. So I imagine as we get closer to the start, things will start to go off a little bit here, you can see. And obviously we haven't accounted for the jaw movement. That's another discussion for another day. But we now have some geometry that actually tracks pretty much with our head, and that's pretty cool. So we should definitely version up at this point. And let's talk about how we can use this finally. Let's start by adding a light. So we have our render here. We have our source, and let's just project. We don't need to do it like this, but let's just project the image data back onto our model using our camera. So this is what we get. This is our rendered 3D. And now let's go into our 3D view. And we'll actually frame our geometry. And I'll go out of point selection node back to node selection. And you'll see there we have our head. It's not perfect. And we have a doubled up head. But all we really care about is the front facing right now. And we need to create a scene at this point. So, because we're going to have more than one object rendering out. So I'll just add a scene node here. And pop that into, whoops, that's the wrong place, sorry. That's obsolete now. Pop that in line here on the way to the scanline renderer. And now we'll add a light. Feed the light into the scene. And there we have some custom lighting. Oh, it's a point light. Why don't we change it to a spotlight? Rotate it around. Set it up like that. And let's see how that renders out. You can see we're doing a mix right now. If I come to the scanline renderer, I should add those pixels back. So I'll change the operation to a plus. Have a look at the final merge. And now let's adjust the light intensity. We've got a little seam there. We can do some fall off. And we also have not adjusted any of the anti-aliasing settings on the renderer. So you can see we have a genuine light interaction there, and it should be tracking in with our own shot. Except for one thing, and that is that actually this needs to parent to the camera, because remember we set up this scene so that his head seems to stay still and the camera moves. And of course, once we do that, our light's going to move into a separate position. So I'll leave you guys to figure out how to set that up rather than me re-navigate that right now. I do want to show you one other thing. So that's the lighting. The other thing is we're still working with our proxy geometry. And so we can come back to our regeo. We should version up before we do things like this, because this will make Nuke mad. And we can go and choose E in full. And it's going to switch out, and you see instantly actually the crease there on the nose fixed itself. Going back to the proxy, and now going to the full. And there we have it. So as you can see from some very simple geometry that we threw together in Modo, we actually have a lot of flexibility here. So finally wrapping up, I parented the light to the camera. Remember we had the camera moving around the object, so the lights need to move with the camera since the head is actually the thing moving, and we just pretended that the head was static and the camera was moving for the sake of the solve. So now the lights move with the camera, which means that they should essentially stay static in the room while our subject moves, and we'll watch that. You'll see we have quite a natural relighting. And as his head moves, the lighting will effectively remain the same, and so it will illuminate different parts of his face based on the angle. That's it for this week. Next week, we're going to start on the main shot of the course, where we actually have a girl turn into cloth and collapse to the ground, and her spirit fly up into the sky. So we're going to be having fun with particles. with all kinds of clever ways of relighting surfaces and actually using some dynamics in Modo to create the cloth effect. So that'll be a really fun week to kick off that whole project. And just enjoy yourself, play around with the lighting, and feel free to bug me in the forums with any issues you come up against.